help us explore this idea of acting reciprocally in civic life, we're joined now by Oskar Zambrano. He's the Director of Civic Engagement and Advocacy at the Latino Community Fund. Oskar, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us first just about what the Latino Community Fund does and how you all work.
Yeah, so LCF for short, Latino Community Fund, what we do is we started as an organization to help smaller organizations and community groups that are in philanthropy. Usually about 1% of all philanthropy in the United States goes to POC, communities of color. Mm-hmm. And so LCF was created in order to help shift some of those resources into communities of color, especially in the Latino community that is not being as well served in the philanthropy world. Mm.
And out of that initial mission now, you've really been doing work to foster kind of bottom-up, inside-out organizing and activism capacity, right? Tell me about how that evolution has unfolded.
Yeah, so and we have been very in tune with the community from the beginning, and from that initial conversation, then there was a realization there was a need for civic engagement. In order to really not just empower communities with money and funding, we also needed to be part of the solution from policy level, and also being in the forefront of directing our conversation and our stories.
Now that sounds sort of commonsensical to somebody listening, but as we know, when you think about the ecosystem of nonprofits, civic engagement work, social justice work, it often doesn't happen that way, right? It often happens where smart, experienced people who think of themselves as having degrees and titles will decide what's the best way to allocate resource, right? And this idea that you've just kind of mentioned in passing of asking the community where they thought funds should be deployed, what they thought they needed in terms of skills, and then kind of delivering in response to the community. That's sort of I wouldn't say upside down, but it's a very different approach from what you see. Right?
We've turned the system upside down in the way that, like you said, it makes common sense. And for a lay person, someone that is not involved in the community, as an average citizen, you would imagine that it should be bottom up, you know. But this notion of being the experts, the policymakers, the policy advisors and analysts and so on, and being elected official and working in a larger nonprofit or in a larger, policy development organization, usually tends to trickle down. You know, that this sense of trickle down economics, we have trickle down policy, and so what we've done is really flip that around. So where we get input, feedback, and we're on the ground every day through our different programs, our different community partners statewide, where we listen. We have our ear to the ground to really listen what the community needs, and then from there, I would start advocating up down to the larger organizations and the larger funding streams.
So tell me about one recent example of this in Burien and how some initial anti-immigrant sentiment and action led to activism that led to other stuff.
Right, so one of our programs which I helped manage and direct is the Alianza Youth Leadership Network, and it's a statewide network of students from across the state. And what has happened is that a lot of communities like in Central Washington, Eastern Washington are suffering from brain drain. And that's when students leave the local communities to come to Seattle or some other larger communities, and they stay here. They don't go back to the community to take those resources, that knowledge back and implement them there. So Alianza was created in order to help support the students that are coming to larger cities to know that there's community here, to know that they have someone that they can relate to, especially being Latino. It's very difficult coming from Yakima, where there's a lot of like taco stands and Mexican food, to coming here, and then you have to really look out. So Alianza Leadership Network, we have students in Burien and Highline School District throughout the Southern King County, and they were the ones that first alerted to the fact that there was, within district, the day after the Trump election, students were being openly racist and openly pushing the envelope with racism. The school district didn't respond as it should have. And from that point on, then things just started escalating. And so that's how we heard first about Burien, but then we were able to come in early, help train some of the students, help train some of the community members on voter registration, on how to get civically engaged, how to advocate for yourself in your community.
And out of that organizing, I believe, emerged one of the two people who ended up being the first Latino members of the city council elected in Burien, correct?
Yeah, and so there was a lot of conversation around what should be done next, and we work with other partners. It's not just all Latino Community Fund. We have other community partners, and from those conversations as a whole, we started finding people that might be interested or knowing that someone would be interested, and then trying to find resources for them, trying to find not just for them as candidates, but because we can't do that as a 501c3, but trying and find support for the community members that wanted to support in some way or some fashion.
But again, being led by the community in the first place. So this idea of, the opposite of trickle-down civic engagement, of bottom-up or middle-out civic engagement. Describe some other ways on different issues where how that works. So if I'm a member of the Latino community, whether it's in Burien or Kent or Seattle or Yakima or wherever, and I want to start participating, right? I just want to start getting experience cooperating with other folks in learning about an issue or getting my voice heard on that issue. How do I plug in? What happens?
So we have different, we have this theory of change that is the multiple points of contact. So you might come for Medicaid support, or you might come in for, learning about how like Fresh Bucks works with the farmers markets. And so at that point, we include voter engagement at every piece. So we include voter registrations. If you can't register to vote, then how can we support you in other ways? So we have different point of contacts from that point, and we do an intake basically where we help guide your interests, especially as students with the Alianza program. You might be interested in business, so we have some business partners we can connect you. You might be interested in policy, so we have other policy partners that we can connect you. But at every point, keeping you engaged, keeping you connected. Then we do a training on civic engagement where you learn, especially with the immigrant community, they don't know how the political system works or how government in general works, the three branches.
So that last point actually is what I want to pose my last question to you on that. So in a lot of immigrant communities, there's wariness about government, maybe lack of trust in, the safety of getting involved in politics or civic life. How do you overcome that hurdle of a lack of trust? How do you start creating a virtuous circle of trust in these communities?
And that's with larger organizations. They do helicopter campaigns in communities. They come, do a lot of resources, a couple of $1,000 or $1 million, and then they leave. So what we do is we plant seeds. We really go into the community to build trust exactly for that reason. When we advocate for them, they know that it's in their best interest. We're not going to leave the next year or the next 2 years. And if funding does go away, we actually left behind youth leaders or community leaders that can continue the work that's sustainable. So what we've done really is to build trust, and it takes time. And that's what a lot of campaigns, a lot of civic engagement programs don't do, is that they don't want to engage because they want a fast return of investment for however they invest. So for us, it's more of long-term investment, really building that leadership in community, and that trust that comes along the way. It's just automatic.
You've been in this role as we speak here about 3 years, and Latino Community Fund is about a decade old. How have you changed? Have you been changed by the people who you're working with and who are starting to participate and cooperate in these ways?
I think so. I mean, it's hard not to change when you work with community, and there's many points of view. But I think I have been changed for the better in the sense of working with youth. It's just very invigorating and very powerful to know that I go to work every day knowing that this is why I do my work. Working with communities, especially communities of color, in this political era, with immigrant communities, I know when I go and talk to them, this is why I do my work. And we have small wins, like last week in South Park, Immigration ICE was there, and one of our Latino community members, Jose, he's one of our directors as well, was first in the scene. He connected with all of our network of the Latino Equity Network. We connected with the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, which we're part of, and we were able to push away ICE from this condominium or this apartment building.
Where they were about to conduct a warrantless search, right?
Exactly. And so that was community coming together. And to me, when I see these examples and why we do what we do, that is what's really invigorating for me. And as a person, I can only just change for the best. And it gives me more hope, and it gives me a louder voice to advocate for what is right versus what should we be doing.
Well, thank you, Oskar, for your example and the work of Latino Community Fund.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. My guest today has been Oskar Zambrano. He's the Director of Civic Engagement and Advocacy at the Latino Community Fund. You can find out more about them at latinocommunityfund.org. Thank you, Oskar.
Thanks very much.